للتعرف على رؤية الآخر لنا. دكتورة تامارا ألبرتيني سويسرية، وأعدت درجة الدكتوراه في ألمانيا، وقامت بترجمة رسالة الحسن بن هيثم حول تربيع الدائرة من العربية إلى الفرنسية، وتوالت أبحاثها في الفلسفة الإسلامية والفلسفة العربية الكلاسيكية والمعاصرة. وكشأن الأساتذة المتميزين في معظم أرجاء العالم، انتقلت منذ حوالي 12 عاماً من سويسرا إلى أمريكا. تعرفت عليها في زياراتي لجامعة هاواي التي تتميز بأنها لا تدرس الفلسفة بل الفلسفة المقارنة، وهذا مدخل جديد للفلسفة نحن في شديد الحاجة إليه. نشكر الدكتور الأستاذ العميد، نشكر الدكتور الفشت لتفضلهم بدعوتها لإلقاء محاضرة Intellectual Challenge of Contemporary Arab Philosophy. Critical Assessment، التحدي العقلي للفلسفة العربية المعاصرة. وجدت فيها مؤمنة بالفكر العربي وبالحق العربي وبالعطاء العربي القديم والحديث. تعلم عن الفلسفة العربية أكثر مما نعلم نحن، القديمة والمعاصرة، تهتم بها وتؤمن بها وتخلص لها أكثر من أي أحد منا. لذلك كانت دعوتها الكريمة لتشريفنا بهذه المحاضرة. هي مسؤولة برامج الدراسات العليا في الفلسفة العربية والإسلامية في جامعات هاواي وجامعات أمريكية وجامعات أوروبية، وسوف قضت شطرا من طفولتها في تونس، وحضرت دروس قرآنية وهي تحفظ من الأحاديث والآيات أكثر مما يحفظ كثيرون منا. تفضل سيادتها بإلقاء المحاضرة.
العميد المكرم، الزملاء الكرام، أعزائي الطلبة، إنه شرف عظيم أن أتحدث إليكم. حقا أقدر الدعوة الأستاذ الدكتور محمد عثمان الخشت رئيس جامعة القاهرة، والأستاذ الدكتور أحمد الشربيني عميد كلية الآداب. امتناني الخاص يذهب للأستاذ الدكتور حسن حنفي، إن نصوصه هي بداية بحثي في الفلسفة العربية. وكذلك خالص شكرا لصديقتي الغالية الأستاذة الدكتورة يمنى الخولي. مرة أخرى شكرا جدا. إنه شرف لي أن أكون هنا في هذه المؤسسة المصرية الشاملة. قد تكون بعض الأفكار التي سأقدمها لكم جديدة، وربما تكون غير عالية أو حتى استفزازية. لقد أوضحتهم في عدد من الجامعات، أولا في سويسرا والولايات المتحدة، ومؤخرا في الأكاديمية الروسية للعلوم وجامعة صوفيا في بلغاريا، حيث قدمت سيمينارات عن الفكر الإسلامي. ومع ذلك أنتم زملائي العرب أهم الجمهور في بحثي في الفلسفة العربية، أو ما أعتقد الفلسفة العربية ليست مسألة من الماضي، بل هي ظاهرة الأفكار والتحقيقات والإبداعات العربية المعاصرة. سواء كنتم توافقون أو لا توافقون، فإن تعليقاتكم ستكون ثمينة لبعث المستقبل. تعلمون أنه سيسعد الفلسفة العربية أن تنضم إلى عائلة الفلسفة المقارنة، حيث سيلتئم الشرق والغرب. وبعد حان الوقت لبدء محاضرتي باللغة الإنجليزية، لأنني كذلك أستاذة أمريكية. So, the title of my lecture in English, The Intellectual Challenge of Contemporary Arab Philosophy, a Critical Assessment. This is for my So I speak of Arab philosophy in my title. By doing so, I point out the tradition's ethnicity. The greater emphasis, however, is to be placed on the contribution to Arab thought, a relatively new branch of world philosophy that is receiving little to no attention in current Western scholarships. What is more disturbing is that where a mention of Arab philosophy can be found, it is typically used in reference to Islamic philosophy. While one may excuse medieval authors, such as Thomas Aquinas, Bonaventure, and many more, for using indiscriminately Arab and Muslim, or rather Mohammedan, which is even worse, but that was in the Middle Ages, there is no justification to do so today. We live, or should be living, in a post-Orientalist era. Moreover, if the language in which a philosophical tradition has expressed itself is representative of the culture, legacy, heritage, and or worldview in which said language is in use, well, then philosophy written in English is to be called English philosophy. I doubt anyone in the Anglophone world would agree with that assessment. Let's wait for everyone to sit down.
الفلسفة العربية المعاصرة نتيجة تفكير عدة أعراق في الوطن العربي، والصحيح عرب، أمريكية، روس، إلى آخر القوميات التحتية في الوطن العربي. وفي نفس الوقت البعض يفضل أن يسمي هذا التفكير الإسلامي، وهذا صحيح أيضا. فالتفكير العربي والتفكير الإسلامي لا يتناقضان، فنحن لدينا اللغة العربية اللسان، ولدينا الثقافة الإسلامية. اللغة العربية تربطنا بكل إخوتنا العرب في الجولان وفي القدس، والثقافة الإسلامية تربطنا بإخوتنا المسلمين في تركيا وإيران ووسط آسيا وأندونيسيا وماليزيا إلى آخر الامتداد الإسلامي في أفريقيا وآسيا. هذا هو الموضوع الذي سأتكلم عليه هذه الليلة في الفلسفة العربية المعاصرة من أجل تحديد المصطلح.
So what is Arab philosophy?
إذن هي الفلسفة العربية.
Let me begin with some negative comments, but not in the moral sense. Not every Arab philosopher necessarily contributes to Arab philosophy. Some excel in ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, and so forth, and are no different from their Western counterparts. Dr. Yamna al-Kholi, for example, is a philosopher of science, not a contributor to Arab philosophy. That's a good question. Why Yamna? Another point, Arab philosophy does not consist in one unified school of thought. Just because two Arab philosophers reflect on Arab rationality, Arab values, Arab reforms, and/or Arab language, one should not expect them to share similar, let alone the exact same views. Suffice it to be reminded of Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle and Plato never agreed on anything, and yet they were both contributors to Greek philosophy.
ما هي الفلسفة العربية؟ هي ليست الفلسفة النظرية فقط، ولكنها فلسفة تتضمن الأخلاق والسياسة والمعرفة والطبيعة، فهي فلسفة جامعة لكل هذه الجوانب المعرفية، وفي نفس الوقت هي فلسفة تضع نفسها في تاريخ الفلسفة، وليس فقط في أنها اتصال لليونان أو للغرب الحديث، ولكن هي فلسفة أصيلة تجمع بين هذه المعارف بمفكرين قدماء ومحدثين ينتهون إلى نتائج تتعلق بجوانب الفلسفة المختلفة.
My next item. Not only Muslim Arabs contribute to Arab philosophy. As you know, there are also Christian philosophers in the Arab world today, and who is to say, one day there might be Arab philosophers who have joined or will join very different religious communities. So this is really about an Arab worldview. And to return to a point I made earlier, the use of Arabic language is not a determining factor. I repeat, is not a determining factor. While there are overlapping areas between Arab philosophy and Islamic philosophy, the two terms are not synonyms. Here is a brief description of both traditions of thought, which also sheds light on the relationship between the two.
الفلسفة العربية هي فلسفة ليست فقط مكتوبة باللغة العربية، ولكنها فلسفة مكتوبة بعدة لغات، بالفارسية وبالتركية وبالأندونيسية والماليزية والطاجكستية وكل لغات آسيا الوسطى. إذا الفلسفة العربية لا تعني ما هو مكتوب باللغة العربية، ولكن تعني أنها اللغة العربية أحد لغاتها، ومن ثم فالفلسفة الإسلامية هي الأعم التي يمكن أن تضم الفلسفات التي كتبت بلغات أخرى غير العربية.
So, Islamic philosophy could be written in any language, used anywhere in the Islamic world. But Arab philosophy needs to be written in Arabic. So, a very brief sketch of what I consider to be Islamic philosophy, or what I consider to be characteristic of Islamic philosophy. Of course, a very complex tradition with multiple links to other traditions and disciplines. So it is a hybrid. And you know, the world's best cultures and civilizations are always hybrids. Islamic philosophy incorporated knowledge from the classical period, called Greek sciences and philosophy. Vast materials came from Persian and Indian sources, especially from within medicine and mathematics, respectively. A careful examination of what counts as philosophy reveals that Mu'tazila, Kalam, jurisprudence, Sufism, all of that has to be included. You cannot apply the same criteria like in Western philosophy.
الفكرة الأساسية للفلسفة العربية ليست هي الفلسفة الإسلامية. الفلسفة الإسلامية متعددة الأصول، متعددة الآراء، متعددة الأجناس، قديما وحديثا. فتبدأ بالفلسفة الإسلامية، هي الفكرة الأساسية. الفلسفة العربية ليست هي الفلسفة الإسلامية. الفلسفة الإسلامية متعددة الأعراق والأجناس، كما أن الفلسفة العربية المعاصرة يساهم فيها مسلمون وغير مسلمين. تبدأ
دكتور صبري دكتور صبري حاضر المستمع. ده الدكتور حسن حنفي لو عارفين ده يعني.
Alright, maybe I should just continue. Alright, let's go to the next slide. I'll go very quickly over these items because we'll never end otherwise. So, about Islamic philosophy, I came to understand that there were common problems, I call them smaller Orientalisms. The worst one, in my estimation, is to think of it as medieval. Because if it is medieval, it means that it is past. But Islamic philosophy is not past. It never died. It's still ongoing, right? So obviously not a right thing to do. I'll just comment on the item that says Islamic philosophy is not Greek derived. You see, the Mu'tazila, I call it an ultra-rationalist school of thought. So the Mu'tazila came before the translation made from Greek texts. All right, everybody comfortable? Can we continue? Yeah, thank you. All right. So my point of view is Greek texts were translated into Arabic because there already was a rationalist tradition. This is really the most important item about Islamic philosophy allegedly being Greek derived. I put there the title of an article where I discuss this in greater details. But let's move on. We want to know about Arab philosophy. So let's take it from there. All right. So since I skipped a few things, let me find the line. So I said Islamic philosophy has many links to other traditions. That's very clear for Arab philosophy as well. Let's move on. We're never going to finish otherwise. So let's speak about Arab philosophy. No, we're not going back. Okay, we have to be disciplined, otherwise this is not going to work. All right. Okay.
الفلسفة الإسلامية ليست الفلسفة الوسيطة، ليست فلسفة وسيطة. مشكلة التحقيق الفلسفة والوسيطة هي الفلسفة الغربية التي تتوسط النهضة الإغريقية والنهضة الحديثة. أما الفلسفة الإسلامية فليست هكذا. وبدأت تتحدث عن الخلفية المعرفية التي صدرت عنها الفلسفة الإسلامية، تجعلها غير وسيطة، هي كلاسيكية. خصائص الفلسفة الكلاسيكية الماضية تجعلنا قادرين على تحقيق على تحديد العناصر الأساسية، الخصائص الأساسية، مؤلفين معينين ونصوص معينة، وقادرين على أما الفلسفة الإسلامية إذن هي ليست الفلسفة العربية، والفلسفة الإسلامية ليست الفلسفة الشرق أوسطية. الفلسفة الإسلامية ليست هي الفلسفة التي ناشئة عن الفلسفة الإغريقية. الفلسفة الإسلامية ليست أدبيات دينية. دي الأفكار الرئيسية. الفلسفة الإسلامية لها وضعية خاصة سوف نقوم تحليلها.
So again, let's move on and talk about Arab philosophy, the topic of tonight. Arab philosophy too is not isolated from other world traditions. It is oriented toward both East, comprising classical and modern Islamic thought, and West, of course, both of them within quotation marks, beginning with the Greeks and continuing to this day. I therefore call it Janus-like, Janus, yeah? Because the Roman guardian of the Roman house was looking inside and outside. So it looks to me it could be a good metaphor for Arab philosophy. So meaning it looks at the same time East and West, at the same time. And none is the past only or just the future. Both the East are past and future, and the West are past and future. Since Arab philosophy thrives on scrutinizing and feeding up both traditions, naturally, depending on the thinker you study, Islamic materials could be more dominant than Western ones, or vice versa.
الفلسفة العربية، الفلسفة الغربية اتجاه من العصر الإغريقي حتى المرحلة المعاصرة. أما الفلسفة الإسلامية العربية فهي تشبه إلهية لها وجهين، وجه يتجه إلى الماضي العصر الكلاسيكي حيث الفلسفة كانت إسلامية، والفلسفة العربية هي الفلسفة الإسلامية، ووجه يتجه نحو الحاضر والمستقبل حيث الفكر العربي، الفكر الإسلامي الحديث الذي نشأت معه الفلسفة العربية.
Moreover, Arab philosophy is critical, inwardly and outwardly. It is also cumulative and selective, which I mean by the two diagrams. It is cumulative because it neglects none of the cultural, intellectual threads woven into the fabric of Arab Islamic intellectual culture. Greek, Persian, Indian, pre-Islamic, Arab, Islamic, modern, Western, and it is at the same time selective. It doesn't just take everything, right? No philosophy just takes everything. Philosophy is critical. One can read Arab philosophy as a response to Antonio Gramsci's famous statement. And you can read it off the screen. The starting point of critical elaboration, you can just read it with me, is the product of the historical process to date, which has deposited in you an infinity of traces without leaving an inventory. So I just need instructions. Should I continue? Should I continue? Okay. Okay. So, all right. So let's move on. The words of Antonio Gramsci have sometimes been understood to express a sentiment of powerlessness vis-a-vis the multiple and unidentified cultural marks in one's heritage, intellectual or otherwise. Instead, as also Edward Said once pointed out in an interview, Gramsci's words are to be read as an invitation. Can I have everyone's attention? Thank you. Gramsci's words, those words, can be also read as an invitation to begin the labor of inventorizing. Seen in this light, one may state that Arab philosophy is designed to be empowering in that it calls not only for a review of the storehouse of Arab heritage, but also for a critical sifting of the historic deposits. Also, unlike Islamic philosophy in the classical period, Arab philosophy remains equidistant from and critical of both East and West. Islamic philosophy borrows from both East and West, but is not identical with either. Are you my new translator? Good. All right. Do you want to make a quick reference?
Okay.
Let me quickly explain. Yeah. Oh, that's good. So self-critique, and fierce independence are the marks of Arab thought. I find them in all of the Arab philosophers that I have been able to study so far. I have a short list. This is by no means exhaustive. The list is very, very long. So all I'm doing here is giving you some names from among the giants. And of course, Professor Hassan Hanafi is one of the giants. Another major figure, the way I see it, is Muhammad Abd al-Jabiri. He was from Morocco. Constantine Zurayk from Syria. Of course, another great Egyptian, Zeki Nabi Mahmoud, an amazing philosopher, and the list goes on and on. But I also like to point out that there is in the younger generation quite a few of proponents, and I'm just choosing here two names almost randomly. Ali Mabrouk, as you know, passed away rather unexpectedly, an amazing figure. And I wanted to include a woman, so I also have Elizabeth Suzanne Kassab, who is doing an amazing research on Arab philosophy.
الدكتورة تمارا تتحدث عن أنها قد أعدت قائمة قصيرة فيما بحسب تعبيرها ما يتضمن أهم المفكرين العرب المعاصرين، وكذلك أضافت إليه بعض الأسماء النسائية الهامة، وهي قد ضمنت هذه القائمة أسماء مثل الدكتور حسن حنفي والدكتور محمد عابد الجابري رحمه الله وقسطنطين زريق وزكي نجيب محمود الذي نعرفه جميعا، بالإضافة إلى أسماء أخرى أحدثوا من ذلك مثل الدكتور علي مبروك وإليزابيث كساب وغيرهم.
For today's lecture, I chose to focus on Constantine Zurayk for a variety of reasons. For instance, my colleagues tell me, what do you know about Arab philosophers? You only talk about Hassan Hanafi. So I needed to start working seriously on another Arab philosopher. And frankly, also because I'm currently interested in the notion of liberation and self-liberation in the Arab world. And you'll tell me what you think about this, but it seems to me Zurayk is a very good author to study in relation to that question.
وقد وجدت أنه من الأنسب أن تركز على قسطنطين زريق على أساس أنها كانت دائما ما تواجه بهذا السؤال، لماذا تركزين دائما على أو في أغلب الأحيان على حسن حنفي وفلسفته العربية تتسع لأكثر من ذلك، وهي الآن بصدد التركيز على قسطنطين زريق أيضا لأسباب أخرى أكثر وجاهة، هي أنها تركز أيضا على قضية التحرير والتحرر على المستويين الاجتماعي والفردي.
On the subject of liberation and self-liberation, I thought I would introduce very quickly two positions to have a comparison. It's good to compare and contrast. Another two, I think, rather influential 20th century Arab concepts relating to this issue have to do with, again, Edward Said, I mentioned him a moment ago, and the other one, I just called it the Islamists. No name, it's just, at this point, a fiction. I'm just trying to think of a character whom we would call the Islamists. You would never think that these two positions could be discussed in the same context. And yet, there is a similarity. It is in the choice of the means envisaged that the differences come to the forefront. So, for instance, you could say that liberation is to be tackled in a very different way for Said than for the Islamists. Said saw the Arab mind entangled in the image that the West had created of the Arab, the Oriental, the Middle Easterner, and accordingly dedicated his life to remedying this state of affairs by relentlessly critiquing the West's attitude vis-a-vis the Arab world. Unlike Said, the Islamist is not interested in engaging the West. There's no conversation there. Instead, the Islamist works on liberating the Arab mind by inducing a cultural separation from the West, which he thinks can only be effected by a radical turn to religion. Needless to point out which position is currently exerting the greater influence in the Arab world.
الآن يعني تتطرق البروفيسورة تمارا إلى نوعين من المعالجة. معالجة إدوارد سعيد الذي أتت على ذكره منذ قليل، وهو الذي رأى أن علينا أن نحاول أن ننقل تلك الصورة التي تكونت لدينا من قراءتنا ومطالعتنا للاستشراق، وذلك دون يعني تخطيط حد فاصل بين الثقافتين العربية والغربية بما يستبعد إحداهما على الأقل، وتقارن ذلك بمحور آخر أو يعني معالجة أخرى هي المعالجة الإسلامية. والمعالجة الإسلامية ترمي أيضا إلى محاولة تحرير العقل العربي حسب ما ترى أو الإسلامي، ولكن ذلك يتم عن طريق مختلفة هي وضع حد فاصل بين العقلين أو الثقافتين العربية والغربية في نوع من التأكيد على نوع من درجة من النقاء العقدي والديني لدى المسلمين بما لا يسمح باختلاط تلك العناصر الإسلامية مع العناصر الغربية.
A comparison with Zurayk, however, shows a third possible solution. It is as secular as Said's, but entirely focused on the self-liberation of the Arab world. However, for Zurayk, there is no liberation of the individual Arab without the reinvention of Arab culture, which, according to him, can only take place by using critical, rational, and scientific means. Liberation needs to come from within, by cultural transformation in order to reach the individual Arab. This was particularly dear to Zurayk, since for him, liberation always starts with the individual.
وتحاول ثانيا أن تشير إلى معالجة أخرى ثالثة حاولت أن تبني التحرر الوطني والتحرر الاجتماعي على أساس أن التحرر الفردي والعقلانية. فلدى مستقيم زريق صاحب هذه المعالجة فإن التحرر الاجتماعي لا يمكن أن ينبني إلا على نوع أو على درجة من التحرر والعقلانية الفردية.
I'd like to introduce Zurayk's actual thoughts on the need of change by first reading some of his quotations. For instance, very simple, what makes an Arab an Arab? You would think there is an easy answer, but there isn't. I looked up the definition of the Arab League. 22 countries, right, are in the Arab League. They say an Arab is a person whose language is Arabic, who lives in an Arabic-speaking country, and is in sympathy with the aspirations of the Arabic-speaking people. This definition would not satisfy Zurayk's inquisitive mind. Another of his questions asks, if you can just push the next one, yes. Is it possible to have an Arab civilization in our modern world? Provocative. Zurayk is the master of provocation. A more elaborate take raises the essential question is, how can we radically and expeditiously transform Arab society? Now these are not my words, this is Zurayk. I don't agree with you, but this is what he said. Transform Arab society from an affective, delusive, mythological, and poetic society into a practical, realistic, rational, and scientific one. How can we effect this revolution, which assures its safety, capabilities, and dignity in the modern world? I like the capabilities and the dignity, but I also like the affective and the poetic, so I would not throw those away. But again, that was Zoray's position, and I'll let you translate.
يعني وهو قسطنطين زريق يعني هو يطرح سؤالا جذريا وتراه الدكتورة تمارا يعني أستاذا في هذا المجال وسؤاله الأساسي هل يمكن أن تقوم الآن حضارة عربية من حيث المفهوم؟ هل مفهوم الحضارة العربية اليوم يمكنه أن يطرح في السياق الثقافي العالمي؟ ويسأل أيضا كيف يمكن لنا أن نتحدى بشكل جذري المعوقات المعاصرة وأن يغير أو أن يثور المجتمع العربي من كونه يعني خرافيا شعبيا غير علمي غير عقلي إلى مجتمع جديد. كيف يمكن لنا أن نؤثر في تلك الثورة إذا ما سمعناها كذلك بحيث تفتح لنا يعني عالما جديدا أو حداثة عربية أصيلة.
So these words, the last ones you heard, clarify that Zorayk was intent on inducing dramatic change, a radical reconceptualization of the Arab world. Very ambitious, right? Another trait of Zorayk is to look at past and present from a future perspective. This is very good. So you project a future, and from the future, you look at the past and the present. You see, this is what is being done today in futurology, in future studies. Very exciting.
يعني هي تحاول الدكتورة أن تضع تلك المحاولة في سياق المستقبلية، يعني هناك نزعة من اليوم تدعى بالمستقبلية في الفكر والفلسفة والعلم، وقد نظر قسطنطين زريق إلى الماضي والحاضر من خلال المستقبل، أو حاول أن يؤسس منظورا مستقبليا للتأويل أو إعادة فهم الحاضر والماضي، وهي ترى ذلك أنه سوف يكون مبدأ لتكوين مفهوم جديد مختلف عن العربية، صفة الحضارة العربية.
And this is the background to the next quotation, which again is very provocative. Islam is a civilization in the Arab past, not the future. But the context is you have to look at the present from the future, right? So it's all about reinvention and about finding a new foundation upon which to build a future civilization. According to Zorayk, if something worked in the past, it doesn't mean it will work again in the future. So he believed in the unicity of historic events. Islam was very powerful in helping create Arab civilization at some point in history. But for Zorayk, it doesn't mean that you can repeat it. So he looked for a new foundation. To clarify, for Constantine Zorayk, Islamic values were never to be abandoned. They were never to be abandoned. He was very clear on this point. He only insisted that you couldn't use them as the foundation. Another bold statement speaking to the necessity to renew and transform the Arab world is where he says in no ambiguous terms, I'm just making sure that it is here, yes. The reason for the victory of the Jewish state was its roots in modern Western life. While we, for the most part, are still distant from this life and hostile to it, your feedback will be very interesting for me. They live in the present and for the future, while we, he means Arabs, while we continue to dream the dreams of the past. Well, again, I would say there's nothing wrong about dreaming, but maybe you could dream and do something else. What I like about this quotation is there is no anger. There is no anger expressed against anyone. Instead, Zurayk points out what he thinks is the basis that made the Jewish state successful. According to him, the recipe is it is future-oriented. That's his diagnosis. And he wanted his fellow Arabs to do the same, project themselves from a future point of view. However, before we move on, I'd like you to get better acquainted with Zurayk, the man. Yeah.
يعني قبل أن ننتقل إلى النقطة التالية، يعني بحث مستشفين زريق ومستشفين آخرون في الواقع عن السبب الذي تقدمت به الدولة اليهودية أو التي نجحت بها على الأقل على المدى القصير والمتوسط، وهو أن قيامها قارة في الحداثة الغربية المعاصرة، وأنها نظرت إلى حاضرها من خلال مستقبلها، وأن قسطنطين زريق يرى أن هذا هو أساس التحديث العربي، هو أن ننظر إلى مشكلاتنا وإلى واقعنا الحاضر والماضي ولكن من خلال المستقبل وليس من خلال الماضي. فالظاهرة الإسلامية بها قيم يمكن أن نستند إليها في التحديث ولكنها كظاهرة شاملة لا يمكنها أن تتكرر بطبيعة الحال.
So very briefly, some details from his life. Born 1909 into a Greek Orthodox family in Ottoman Damascus, got his BA in history at the American University in Beirut, moved on to the University of Chicago, moved on to Princeton, all at a very young age. He was a really, a prodigy. But then also extremely active in politics. So 1933, he founded together with some other Arabs the League of the Nationalist Action, and we'll have to talk about the Arabic, use for nationalists. Later, he was a co-founder with George Habash of the Pan-Arab movement of Arab nationalists. But then he always made sure that his career at the university did not suffer. Professor in Beirut, but then again in Syrian diplomatic service, vice president, president of the universities in Damascus and Beirut, and trust me, the list goes on and on. It makes people like us who think we're very busy wonder whether maybe, they're doing something wrong because somebody else was so accomplished. But I want to point out 3 titles, and in particular, a term in each of these titles. I'll have to read it from here because even with my glasses, I don't see that far. So 3 major works. Al-Wa'i al-Qawmi. I'm interested in Qawmi and Qawmiya. Ma'na al-Nakba. I'm interested in Nakba, which is why I put it in bold. And the other work that caught my attention, في معركة الحضارة, on the fight for civilization. I don't need to translate that for you. I'll wait for the translator.
هو يعني سيرة ذاتية مختصرة أو سيرة شخصية مختصرة لقسطنطين زريق، وقد أنجز يعني مناصب وإنجازات هامة في سن صغير، فهو نوع من المعجزة يعني. ولد 1909 على المذهب الأرثوذكسي أثناء قيام الدولة العثمانية بطبيعة الحال في ذلك الوقت. أصبح أخذ البكالوريوس في التاريخ من الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. في 29 أخذ درجة الماجستير من جامعة شيكاغو والدكتوراه سنة 30 من جامعة برينستون. هو أيضا مؤسس مشترك لرابطة القوميين العرب، القومية العربية يعني، وأيضا مؤسس مشترك مع جورج حبش في حركة البان عربيزم أو القومية العربية، وأصبح بروفيسورا في بيروت. اهتم بمفاهيم أساسية مثل الوعي القومي the national consciousness ومعنى النكبة معنى النكبة اللي هو يعني نكبة 48.
That's move on to, I always get confused where to push. Okay, here. So you all know what the Nakba is in the Arab world. I don't need to explain this to you. But what's interesting is to see how Zurayq interpreted the catastrophe, right? For him, it was all about the cause. So the Nakba that you think is just a Palestinian problem, for Zurayq was a concern for the entire Arab world. He wanted to know, how was it possible, right? So that's just the kind of philosopher he was. So the self-critical concept meant that the intellectual, scientific, economical, and spiritual crisis, these are his terms, is not a consequence of the Nakba. He said it was the cause. Very interesting. Now, if the catastrophe came from within Zurayq's position, then he thought the remedy, the solution, would also have to come from within.
يعني هو خطيب زريق حاول ان يقدم ما يمكن ان نطلق عليه النقد الذاتي، النقد العربي الذاتي يعني، من حيث انه يرى ان التخلف، مظاهر التخلف للمجتمعات العربيه هي ليست نتيجه للنكبه، وانما هي سبب لها، وعن طريق ذلك يمكن لنا ان نتوصل الى او ان نتساءل حول اسباب تلك النكبه، وتراه الدكتوره تمارا يعني منظورا جديرا بالاهتمام.
Now, when he wrote these ideas, there was a specific historic context, right? Whatever happened to Palestine. I am, interested in it historically, but the greater fascination is how you can use his ideas for any historic context, right? And that's where I would like to go next. Now, Zurayq would not be the radical philosopher he was if he had stopped his inquiry after working out the diagnosis, without also giving thought to a possible remedy. An American would say, all of that is very nice, but how do you mean to bring about cultural change? And frankly, he did have quite some intriguing suggestions. On the whole, Zurayq examines three pairs of alternatives that in his estimation are major impediments to radical change of Arab societies. And maybe not just. Maybe this is something to keep in mind for many more societies. The first pair presents one with the opposition between modern and religious. The second hinges on the question whether one should look at the past or the future for solutions. And the third relates to the debate whether one should open up to a different civilization. In the context in which Zurayq wrote, the question was whether one should open up to the West or preserve one's own culture.
اوكي، وزريق يحاول ان ينطلق من ثلاث ثنائيات مهمه ومحوريه. اولا الحداثه ام الدين، التقليد الديني، الحداثه ام التقليد الديني. والثانيه هي الماضي ام الحاضر، كيف ننظر الى الماضي ام المستقبل، كيف ننظر الى الحاضر من خلال الماضي ام من خلال المستقبل. والثنائيه الثالثه هي الثنائيه المعروفه بالوافد والرافد، او العنصر الاجنبي في الثقافه ام ما ينتمي الى ثقافتنا.
Now, you probably already expect that Zurayq is not going to accept any of the alternatives, right? So I will refer to these as pseudo-alternatives. Yeah? So let's take a look at the first one, modern or religious thought. Even the briefest look at the terms connoted to modern versus religious reveals the sharp contrast between the worldviews relying either on rationality or on revelation as sources of knowledge, modern civil law, or scripture-based, basically divinely ordained Sharia, and finally democracy or shura, modeled after tribal councils as possible forms of governance. All right. But what of Qawmiya and Ummah? This is where things get really interesting. When I speak of such things, Western setting, and especially in the United States, I have to explain a lot about the structures of Arab language. I don't have to do that here. You will know that better than me. But, it's good to listen to words in every language. In Arabic, it's easier because if you're well trained in grammar, you'll know right away how to find the root. So related words are qawm, tribe, clan. The root is, qawama, to stand up, to rise. There is also qiyamah, resurrection. So, with Arabic words, you can easily open up an entire context, right? So all of that sounds together. It's like a vibration of many, many meanings. Makes philosophizing in Arabic extremely rewarding. And I just added a few terms like sha'b, wataniya, balad, qutr, and frankly, this is something I learned from Professor Hanafi when I used his publications on housing and dwelling. Professor Hanafi would list all of the terms that have to do with a place where you can live, sleep, rest, and so forth. So I try to play a little bit with that here too. Now, obviously, when you translate Qawmiya, you lose almost everything, right? Nobody knows anything about the root of the word. Nobody knows about, tribe and clan and resurrection. But of course, in Arabic, all of that is present. So let me read to you the way how Zurayq speaks of Qawmiya. He says, you can follow on the screen, true Qawmiya cannot contradict in any respect true religion. This is beautiful, right? Qawmiya and religion, there's no separation. Since it is essentially nothing but a spiritual movement. Qawmiya is a spiritual movement. Now translate that into English or any other European language and say nationalism is a spiritual movement. It's kind of difficult to understand. Nationalism is a spiritual movement, but with Qawmiya, you can do that. I'll just finish reading the, a spiritual movement that aims at raising the inner forces of a nation and realizing its spiritual potential so that the nation may contribute its share to the culture and the civilization of the world. Bye-bye.
يعني هي الدكتورة تحاول أن تطرح سؤال زريق عن ما القومية، وهي ترى أن ذلك من صعوبة المكان إذا حاولنا أن نترجمها وأن نفهمها في السياق اللغوي الغربي أو الثقافي الغربي لما تتضمنه هذه الكلمة من جذور معقدة في الثقافة العربية واللغة العربية. فالقومية من القوم ومن القيام ومن القيامة، وهو ما يعني يمنحها أساسا روحيا يعني أو طابعا روحيا على الأقل لا يمكن أن يفهم في السياق الغربي. يرى زريق أن القومية الحقيقية لا يمكن أن تضاد الدين الحقيقي، فالقومية هي أيضا حركة روحية مثل الدين، ولكن كيف يمكن لنا أن نصف القومية أو أن نعرف لها طابعا روحيا أو معنى روحيا؟ هذا هو ما يكشف عنه ذلك التحليل الذي حاولت الدكتورة أن تقدمه لمفهوم القومية في اللغة العربية اشتقاقية.
And I think there is more happening with the concept of Qawmiya in Zurayq's text. In my estimation, he masterfully recognizes the conciliatory chance that lies in the etymology of Qawm. By adopting it, he preserves the cultural link to a remote past. There is never a separation in his philosophy. So the link to a remote past is established, a past when Arabs lived in tribal structures and were bound to each other by lineage and strong social cohesion. I think Zurayq also works a little bit with Ibn Khaldun's notion of asabiya. Some of you may know about it. Let's move on. Zurayq's choice of terms is also brilliant because the manner in which he employs